Things that would get you killed in ancient Hawaii. With its warm weather and endless beaches, Hawaii is a dream vacation destination for many people around the world. But this wasn't always the case. Back in ancient Hawaii, native Hawaiians lived under a strict set of laws called Kapu, and if you broke any of these laws, your punishment would be death. Many of these laws are things people now do every day, so here are 9 things that would get you clubbed to death in ancient Hawaii. Men and women eating together. Imagine you've got a hot date. You pick her up from her hut and walk her down to the beach for a romantic picnic. You sit down and break out some bananas to share and you guys start eating. Suddenly, a nearby fisherman who is watching you from a distance is screaming and pointing at you. And the next thing you know, you're watching in horror as your date has her head shoved onto a rock and proceeds to get her skull bashed in with a club. See, in ancient Hawaii, it was kapu for men and women to eat together. Back then, all foods were considered to be the physical form of one of their gods, and certain foods were associated with gods only men were allowed to eat. The presence of women near these foods was thought to have a quote-unquote defiling effect, so they were forbidden to be around when men were eating. And like in so many other places in the world, it was always the woman's fault if this kapu was broken, so she would be the one to face the consequences. And let me tell you, it doesn't get any easier for women from here. Women eating bananas, coconuts, or pork. Eating a banana doesn't seem like a big deal today, but if you were a woman in ancient Hawaii, walking around the village eating a banana in public would probably be a pretty effective way to delete yourself, as you guessed it, eating bananas was kapu for women. Remember how the ancient Hawaiians believed food was the body of their gods? Well, bananas were said to be the body of Kanaloa, the god of the underworld, so big no-no for women. But just to make things a little more confusing, women actually were allowed to eat a few select varieties of bananas, but only 3 of the 70 varieties found in ancient Hawaii were not kapu. Would you be able to tell the difference between this and this? Yeah, probably better to not risk it. Women were also forbidden from eating pork, which was thought to be the physical form of the god Lono. If you were a woman and you were tired of fish and wanted to eat some red meat, the only option you had was to eat your dog instead. No cows or sheep in ancient Hawaii. Back then, Hawaiian dogs weren't lovable members of the family like they are now. These dogs, called poi dogs, were too small to be used for hunting. Not to mention, they were pretty dumb, so they were only kept around as a lucky charm for children and for food. Did I mention the original breed of poi dog the ancient Hawaiians raised is now extinct? They must have been delicious. Women were also not allowed to eat coconuts, which was the body of the god of war, Ku, because when I think of war, the first thing that comes to mind is coconuts. Looking directly at a chief. Imagine you're in an ancient Hawaiian village, and you hear a crowd of people outside. You walk out of your hut and see a royal procession. Ooh, fun! You scan down the parade until you realize the chief is there, and you accidentally lock eyes with him. He stares back and slowly points at you, and suddenly, your head is on a rock getting bashed in. See, Hawaiian chiefs called ali'i were said to be the descendants of gods, and because of that, there was a lot of things commoners were not allowed to do in their presence. This was mostly based around the idea of a spiritual power called mana, which the ali'i were said to have extreme amounts of, being the descendants of gods and all. Messing with or trying to steal a chief's mana was a quick way to get offed. For example, casting a shadow on a chief or his home. While most people don't think much about their shadow, they were a way bigger deal in ancient Hawaii. A commoner was obviously not allowed to touch a chief, but if you weren't careful, you might slip up and accidentally cast a shadow on him. And this was basically a death sentence. Shadows were thought to be an extension of the person, so casting a shadow on a chief was basically the same as you sticking a finger in his belly button. But that's not all. Even casting your shadow on the chief's home was a punishable offense. One level above casting your shadow on a chief or his hut was stepping on his shadow. Even if it was an accident, this was viewed as you trying to mess with his mana, the ultimate insult that would get you quickly put down. Knowing these kapu laws existed, some chiefs would actually make an effort to only walk around at night, so nobody would accidentally unalive themselves by casting a shadow the wrong way. Touching hair or fingernail clippings of a chief. Even chiefs needed to get their hair cut and fingernails trimmed, but if you were a commoner, you definitely did not want to be around when that happened. If a commoner touched the hair or nail clippings of a chief, this was considered kapu and punishable by death. Must have been pretty hard finding a barber for these guys. The Hawaiians believed that a person's mana was in their hair and nails so that they could be used to put a curse on them. Because of this, Hawaiians burned or buried these things. So if a commoner was ever caught touching the hair or fingernails of a chief, it was assumed they had bad intentions and they would be killed immediately. Wearing yellow or red. The chiefs in ancient Hawaii, much like the chiefs of today, were known for wearing red and yellow. They wore fancy cloaks, capes, and helmets made of tiny red and yellow feathers collected from 2 native birds. These birds were so tiny that it took a lot of time and energy to catch the amount necessary to make a full cape. And since these feathers were the only source of those colors in ancient Hawaii, anyone wearing red or yellow was presumed to be royalty. If it was found out you were not, it was a quick, clubby death for you for impersonating the descendants of the gods. Standing taller than a chief in his presence. If you stood taller than a chief in his presence, you probably wouldn't be taller than him for long. Or alive, I guess. This one might have just been ego, but commoners were expected to lie face down, flat on the ground in the presence of a chief. If anyone stood taller than him, this was kapu, and would quickly lead to their head getting bashed in. So basically, it was best to never be around an ali'i if you were a commoner, if you like staying alive, that is. These rules applied to everyone, from the elderly to the youngest of children. However, there are some documented cases of ali'i being lenient with very small children who broke kapu. Reportedly, when these kids messed up, some got away with just having an eye gouged out instead of being clubbed to death. How kind. Catching the wrong fish. It's a warm summer day, and you bring your fishing net down to the beach to catch some dinner for your family. You throw a perfect cast, and you're excited to see what you'll be eating tonight. But when you check your net, you're horrified to see what you pull up. You quickly try to loosen the fish stuck in the net, and you throw it back into the water, but it's too late. It's already dead. And as it slowly sinks to the sandy ocean floor, it lifelessly stares back at you almost as if it's whispering, "You're next." Because honestly, you probably were. Catching certain fish at certain times of the year was kapu in Hawaii, and surprisingly, these rules made a lot more sense than some of the others in this video. There were 2 fish in particular, one called opelu and another called aku, that were a staple food source for native Hawaiians. The Hawaiians understood that these fish had breeding and spawning seasons, so it was kapu to catch them when they were getting busy making baby fish. This ensured the population of these species were always plentiful, and the villagers always had enough food to eat. Another fish that was kapu was called the moi, which was only to be eaten by the ali'i. Now, I've heard that this is one of the most delicious fish you can catch in Hawaii, so I'm guessing the thinking here was if those annoying poor commoners got a taste, there wasn't going to be enough for the royalty. Evidently, even in modern Hawaii, it's against the law to catch moi in certain months, but at least you won't get your skull caved in if you accidentally hooked one out of season. Chanting. Unlike today, where mystical Hawaiian chants can be sold online for profit by spiritual gurus without any form of punishment, it was a completely different story for ancient Hawaiians. If a commoner chanted in ancient Hawaii, it was basically like calling out for an executioner to come and put you down right away. See, chanting was serious business back then, and it was a practice reserved exclusively for high priests called kahuna, or those taught by master chanters. These chants, called oli, were thought to be spiritually powerful, and to ensure they were performed correctly and only by well-trained individuals, strict kapu were put into place. Some of the ways chanting could get you in trouble were unauthorized chanting performed by unapproved individuals, kind of like this.
Na amakua, na amakua.
Misusing chants in a way that was not its purpose.
Na amakua.
Incorrectly reciting words in the chant. Failing to stick to the proper rituals for a chant.
Na kuhuna.
Chanting as a woman.
Aloha mai. Aloha mai.
Okay, to be honest, while this one is true, I just wanted to show you guys these clips because I thought they were pretty hilarious. If you didn't see anything, it's because we got copyright struck and I had to delete them, but hopefully you did. I'm sure these ladies are nice, but if this was ancient Hawaii, they would definitely be headed for the clubbing rock for breaking all kinds of kapu.